Alright, so if you happen to see the video we did where we ranked the segments of Paris, I Love You, you knew that this one was coming, which is kind of the somewhat sequel to that in this sort of Cities of Love franchise that they kind of put out. Like we talked about in the Paris video, apparently there are two more of these, but we're not going to touch on those because I have not heard any, good things about it, despite some of the people involved. But we are going to focus on this one, and then that'll be it for the Cities of Love with us. Now, when I talked about Paris, I was talking about how I love anthology movies and the way that it was just a bunch of short films kind of put together with just a little transitions as we kind of establish the places and the locations that the shorts were working in and what the shorts were named after. This one did take a different approach, where they did feel the need to have a bit more of a link between them. So we do have these, usually anthologies do have like a wraparound segment, but there's a few things going on here. There's the Justin Bartha thing that kind of comes around with him and Susan Sarandon's daughter later. There's the storyline with the photographer who's kind of walking around recording the characters that we kind of see throughout. And sometimes the characters will intersect in between segments in these moments that don't really have a lot of meaning or any... Like, they're just kind of here to be there, it feels like, to have transition moments, and they sort of act like epilogues and maybe sometimes a prologue to segments, but those don't really add anything to the story otherwise. So these really could have just been broken up and just been individual segments with really nothing tying them together except the city of New York, which I honestly feel like would be a bit more of a beautiful concept. Because like I said, the Justin Bartha stuff and the photographer stuff feels really forced and really tacked on. Even that opening scene where we introduced Justin Bartha and Bradley Cooper and they get into the same cab. But the dialogue between them just sort of feels like two friends that just discovered a video camera and are using it and testing it out for the first time. And there's nothing natural about that, and that's the way pretty much all of these transition scenes go. So I'm not even sure why they took that approach, but I don't care for it. So it's and I don't feel I imagine a lot of it has to do with that, where I don't feel as passionate about New York, I Love You as I do Paris, and I think that's sort of part of it, where they kind of tried a little too hard to make it one connected thing when just the individual segments, as we saw in Paris, work just fine that way. And the theme just kind of speaks for itself as we go on. But here, there's only 10 segments in this one. I guess technically 11, but it's 10, directors, whereas Paris had 18. And so there were obviously two segments cut out of this one. One that was Scarlett Johansson's directorial debut, which was, it's on here as a special feature. And it's a short with Kevin Bacon where he's, it looks like it's set in, a past time, and it's kind of this, not quite black and white, but sort of like Wizard of Oz black and white, if you want to call it that. And it's, he's going around, and it seems like New York is kind of intimidating to him. And then he goes to the pier and he eats a hot dog. And we watch him eat the hot dog in real time. And he finds peace. And that's basically it. And there was another one about a kid with a video camera. And he sees Carla Gugino going through a breakup from a distance. And that one's just kind of meandering and doesn't really go much of anywhere. So that one I can understand why it was cut. Apparently both of these were cut because they kind of had a poor reception when they were in the movie itself. When it was doing the festival run, and then they cut it down to just the 10 segments. I don't know, there's a couple of things in here I probably would have cut out and put the Kevin Bacon one in. As far as there being love in New York, and there being a general love for New York itself, rather than between two people or whatever. But I can understand though why it probably looks like it wouldn't fit, especially since it seems like it's kind of set in a different time and stuff like that. As far as everything else that's here, so apparently the idea was that the rules were set for the directors where they had 2 days they couldn't shoot for more than 2 days, and the short, once it was completed, couldn't be more than 8 minutes. I guess the last thing before we start is to mention, like I mentioned before, that Paris had the segments named after the locations that they were set in, or that at least played a major part in what the story was. The stories in New York, I Love You don't have names. They just, like, if you look like on Wikipedia, it's just like the segments are just called the director's name, or it's just, the number segment they are. So I guess as we go through this, we're gonna do the Friends titles, where it's just gonna be the one with whatever, and I guess that's how we're gonna differentiate them. So that's, like I said, that's how much effort they put into titling them. So that's what we're gonna do. The Scarlett Johansson and the other one that are deleted do have their own titles. So I don't know if these had their own titles to start with or what, and they just weren't ever mentioned anywhere. But yeah, so that's how we're just gonna wing it on the titles here. So similarly to Paris, we talked about how interesting it was that the segment that I thought the least highly of was the first segment of the movie, and it turns out in New York I Love You, it's the same thing. Because number 10 for me is the one with Hayden Christensen and Andy Garcia and Rachel Bilson. And I've got to just say something right away about this one, which is, as far as it being my least favorite, I think, I kind of always wanted to give it the benefit of the doubt before I did this, but to be completely honest with you and completely transparent with you, there was a long time where I just felt like I didn't get this one. Like, I had no idea what was going on or how the characters were connected. So, going back to it, I feel like it could be one thing, but the reason I have it as the lowest is because I think it's the lesser of the two things that could be going on here. There's always a possibility I still don't get it, but here's what I think it could have been. The idea of, we see Hayden Christensen walking down the street, and he pickpockets Andy Garcia, then he ends up at this bar, and he's hitting on Rachel Bilson, using those pickpocket techniques to do so, and then Andy Garcia comes in, and it turns out the two of them are together. And Andy Garcia has caught him hitting on her, and now they have this animosity towards each other, and they're both playing the pickpocket game with each other. So, the way that I initially took it was that Hayden Christensen and Rachel Bilson already know each other, and that this is all one big long con against Andy Garcia, is what I thought it was for a long time. And one of the things about this is, I hate to, hate on them, but to my understanding, Hayden Christensen and Rachel Bilson were in a relationship in real life for a very long time. So you would think, especially in a movie like this, in a segment like this, there would be a lot of chemistry here. But the performances in this segment are so stilted and so unnatural and so, like they're literally reading the script off of cue cards or something at the very last minute. Like, they were told about this project 5 minutes before cameras were rolling, is how they deliver these lines. So I gave them the benefit of the doubt, and I thought, okay, so are they playing it like this is all performative? Like we kind of talked about with the Bob Hoskins segment in Paris, where it's like the whole thing is, oh, they're all in on it, they're kind of performing for a greater audience, for a greater purpose, and it's that whole thing. And like I said, it's just sort of one big long con against Andy Garcia. But that continues because when Andy Garcia comes in, he's very unnaturally, like, sort of demanding. Like, when he goes to Hayden Christensen and he doesn't ask for a cigarette, he demands a cigarette. And these are people that have supposedly never met. You would think, according to both of them, but then there's the thing of, oh, does he recognize Hayden Christensen as a pickpocket? Like, he remembers bumping into him, and then his wallet was gone. And so he's come back now, and there's this sort of confrontation, meaning that Andy Garcia is on to both of them. So when Rachel Bilson starts talking, she says, like, oh, you lost your wallet or something. Or no, he found my phone for me. Hayden Christensen kind of, like, shakes his head, almost like he's saying, like, abort. Like, we don't need to do this anymore. That's the way I took it. Like I said, for a long time, because that's what it looks like. But what it actually seems to be, and the reason it's probably my least favorite, is that it's not as clever as I feel like it's trying to be, where it is like, he just recognizes him as the guy who stole his wallet, and so now and obviously he does recognize him, because after he pickpockets him and takes the money out of his wallet, he says, I managed to get my money back. So he knows it was him. But the thing is the ending of this is she just decides to leave Andy Garcia, I guess, and comes running out after Hayden Christensen. So I guess it's this whole thing of when you look at, going constantly back and forth between them sort of taking from each other and being petty towards each other, the ultimate robbery is finally committed where he steals Rachel Bilson from him and not just his ring or his wallet or his money or whatever. And that's underwhelming. and it just kind of stops. So like I said, there's this little epilogue where she meets him at the basketball court, and that's where it got into my head. It's like, oh, did they already know each other? Like I said, the epilogues here and the in-between stuff just doesn't really seem to matter at all. So I think it's honestly just as simple as it looks. But I feel like if it was the thing where it's like, oh, they're actually conning Andy Garcia and they're in it together, then that would have been something else. But as is, like I said, overall it's just really underwhelming. So yeah, and like I said, it doesn't have the clever feel that I think it was really going for, which is unfortunate. So that's how I feel about that one. But like I said, I'm still not even sure if I know really if that's what's actually going on or not. So so that one's my least favorite, I think. So number 9 for me is the one with Anton Yelchin and James Caan and Olivia Thirlby and a tiny bit of Blake Lively. And this one's by Brett Ratner, who says that this one is autobiographical in a sense, but he wouldn't say in what way. So and it could be a number of ways, it doesn't matter. But what's interesting about this one is, when I saw this movie in 2009 when it first came out, I didn't see it again for probably more than a decade. And this was the one that I remembered the most clearly. So I was surprised to come back to it. I kind of figured it would have been one of my favorites because of that. But coming back to it after over a decade, I found that I wasn't that crazy about this one. It's obviously, I may have just remembered it because of the amazing cast. Because obviously Anton Yelchin was great at pretty much everything, and James Caan is coming in here kind of playing, almost like he's kind of playing on his typical type, and almost kind of, he's playing it but also playing against it kind of at the same time in this interesting way. And then this relationship between Anton Yelchin and Olivia Thirlby, who is supposedly wheelchair-bound, and this is his last-minute date to the prom after Blake Lively dumped him. And so it seems like there'd be a sweet story here, and that's what it sets itself up as. And then it's the whole reveal that Olivia Thirlby is supposedly in a wheelchair. And the way they play this up, it does feel like it's almost playing against itself in regards to, it shouldn't matter that she's in a wheelchair, and it's like, she's just as fun and special as everybody else. But the fact that it plays up the reveal of her being in a wheelchair as an, oh god, this guy has the worst luck kind of thing, and it's like, I don't think the feeling we're going for, but to its credit, I think it's because we're looking at it from his perspective, and that's why the filming of it and the way it's shot feels that way. Where it's like we're getting it from his mindset rather than what we're supposed to feel, is how I'm going to take that. Like I said, giving it the benefit of the doubt. Because we do also get to that point where they first get to the prom, and as soon as they walk through the doors, everybody stops and stares. And now I know that I would never try to speak from the perspective of somebody in a wheelchair as I'm stating fact, because obviously I would not know. But it does feel intentionally exaggerated. Obviously, if you're in a wheelchair, you're going to get stared at. You might hear people whispering. But the way the movie portrays it, where the entire room stops and looks, is also something I'm going to take as more symbolic than literal, I suppose. So, and like I said, the fact that I feel like I keep having to give the benefit of the doubt that is what it's doing. I don't know if it's just I don't trust Brett Ratner, which you can take that statement in a number of ways. But yeah, so the thing about it, though, is that I think it is the final payoff that makes me think not so highly of what the concept ends up being itself and the way it's portrayed, and how it kind of leaves a bad taste. Because we also get to the Central Park scene, which I think is supposed to be this really big, memorable, kind of raunchy and innocent at the same time, and funny in the way that it feels like a scene that was supposed to be an American Pie or something, or an American Pie movie, where, like I said, it kind of balances the innocent and the sweet, but also a little bit of raunchiness, and that's where it does feel like it gets kind of weird there, but also in this case of, oh yeah, prom sex could be just as awkward for anybody in any situation, in any walk of life, if you'll forgive the term, but then, yeah, the reveal comes, where the next morning he takes her back to James Caan, and James Caan's not worried at all, and she gets up and walks out of the wheelchair. And it's like, the idea of it being she's a method actress. Um, I don't. The story felt like it was perfectly fine without that reveal. Maybe that's the part that was autobiographical for Brett Ratner, and that's why it's here. Because otherwise, it didn't. Like, you had the moment where he thinks, he sees her picture, and it's just like from the chest up, and it's like, and then there's the reveal that she's in a wheelchair. That's basically the shoe dropping, so you don't really need another shoe to drop. Like, there's no indication that another shoe's gonna drop. It just feels really out of nowhere for the sake of being out of nowhere. So, yeah, the more I think about this one, the more it just kind of rubs me the wrong way a little bit. And the fact that this is the segment that gets the inevitable line, I love New York, which feels, it doesn't quite feel earned. Like, it kind of feels like it's like that's sort of a closing line to a movie like this, or maybe followed up by one of the more profound or powerful segments. But this one, I don't know. Like I said, it's great to see Anton Yelchin and James Caan. When you look at the whole cast of this whole movie, it's kind of heartbreaking to see how many people we've lost that are in this movie, young and older. Um, and so, yeah, a great cast. And like I said, this was the one I remembered for a long time, but coming back to it now, it's not really sitting as well. So let's go on to number 8, which for me would be the one with the painter and the girl that's played by Shuchi. And this is another one of those ones that kind of feels a bit surface level, where it's about the artist, and the artist, sees a woman, and there's just this instant sort of attraction. Both, maybe, like, for all we know, it could be romantic, but it's certainly artistic in him. And it's this idea that he has to paint her. And so, and he also, as we see in the scene where he collapses, appears to be dying. So the idea that it's like he's aware that this could be his final piece of art, like his final painting, and it's got to be this person with this instant attraction that has happened that you can't really identify or explain. You just see the person and it's there, and then it becomes like this part of your psyche. And we kind of see that happen on the other side, where she declines this whole invitation to paint her. But then he clearly makes an impression because she feels like she sees him around. She mistakes somebody else for him, and it does that whole thing. But then once she realizes her mind has become occupied with him, she decides to go back. After she's had an interaction with him, during the interaction with him, he gave her the address. So once she gets there, a totally random Burt Young is there, telling her that the artist died. And so there's a few directions you could take this, I guess. One of which is it just a tragic story that's surface level? Was there some sort of spiritual thing going on here? Because we see him collapse, and then we see the scene where he asks her to be painted, and then he just dies off screen. So there's the idea that maybe that was him dying when he collapsed. And like I said, there's some sort of spiritual thing guiding her to his apartment so that she can finish his painting. I honestly don't know, but it is one of those things where I feel like this one, maybe the reason it doesn't feel better to me is because it's one that might suffer from the short confines. Like, even at least the short confines for this movie, where it was supposed to be 8 minutes or less. Like, if I'm not saying like feature length would be needed, but if this was like a half an hour short or a 25-minute short, I feel like they probably could have put a lot more power behind it and a lot more meaning behind it. But as it is, it does feel very cut down, which I feel like takes a lot of the power out of it. Where you get the gist of it, where it's like, oh yeah, she had to complete his painting. And then it just kind of leaves you with that. And like I said, the idea of the love between the artist and their art, and the idea of the artist potentially having a connection with their subject, they tackle the love aspect in more than one way, the love theme. Like I said, it just kind of feels like there was supposed to be something more here, but it was the confines of the rules that the directors had to confine these segments. that held it down. So I can appreciate this one, but I don't think it doesn't leave the lasting impression that the others might, despite the tragic nature of it, which you would think would leave more behind, but for me it just kind of really doesn't, unfortunately. So that takes us to what I have at number 7, which is the one with Carlos Acosta and Jacinda Barrett that Natalie Portman wrote and directed. And this one's also one that seems quite simple and is telling us a simple story that we know of and we've heard about and we've maybe seen or witnessed. Where I talked about how much I loved the Nick Nolte segment in Paris, the one that Alfonso Cuarón did, and how the love in the theme is between a father and a daughter, and how that can be just as beautiful as romantic love and just as effective as romantic love, a romantic love story would be. And where it doesn't have to be, confined to two people falling in love, having attraction, stuff like that. You can branch out a little bit. And this is another one that does that. But it also takes on the aspect of a single father in a couple of ways, where we see the father and daughter, and they have this obviously great connection, and he's just walking her around, they go to the park, and then he's mistaken for a nanny. And so that touches on one aspect, which is the idea that this thing you hear about dads tend to often be seen as like babysitters when they're alone with their kid rather than a father who enjoys doing this as much as the mother and has just as much of a connection with their child as the mother does. There's that aspect. There's also the fact that that they're not the same race. You think, oh, he's just watching her. He's the hired help or something, and like it never crosses people's minds he's literally the father, and how sort of kind of degrading that can be, and how insulting that could be, and how to where it kind of it's like people are unintentionally trying to take this piece away from you that is this whole being of being a father, which is this massive chunk of your life, and some like really your whole life, and everything else is just kind of happening around it, and so it tells that, but then I think it also kind of goes into this thing about masculinity, where not only is he the father and he's mistaken for the nanny and stuff like that, but it's also revealed at the end that he's a dancer, and so he's doing this thing that might be able, like his passion is this thing that might be seen as unmasculine or something. So there's a whole thing about that, and that tying into him being seen as a father. I get what it's saying. It also feels very surface level. Like I don't really feel like it's saying much more than that. And doesn't really say it. Like the only way it feels like it really gets any way symbolic is when they're in the park and the daughter sees a squirrel, and it's like, why did the squirrel run away from us? And he says because it was scared, and it's like, is that the mother? I guess I don't know. Like I said, Natalie Portman is extremely talented, but it is a case where, like I said, she wrote and directed it, and it does feel a bit surface level once you get a hold of what it's doing. And also, just in general, it's like, if you see the shot in any movie, short or feature length, of the sun coming through trees, it's like the first thing you would think is, yeah, this is probably somebody's directorial debut. That's so, like I said, but the thing that takes it so far is the sweet relationship between the father and daughter, and there is something important that it's saying here, and it's something that, like I said, that it kind of feels like a bit of a detour in a good way from what the movie's doing, where, like I said, we get kind of wrapped up in the romantic love and stuff like that, and so to just see it between, a parent and child, or specifically a father and daughter here, there's still something beautiful about it, but still in a pretty simple way, which can be a blessing and a curse to be simple. So, and it falls into a little bit of both. So, number 6 is interesting. This is the one where it's apparently 2 segments, but kind of in one. It's the one with Ethan Hawke and Maggie Q, and then later with Chris Cooper and Robin Wright. Now, these two, as far as characters go, these two don't seem to be connected, but they are the same director, and they appear to have sort of the same theme, and there's a similar thing going on here, where 2 people come out for a cigarette, and they have a connection. And they have dialogue in between, and that's what the segment is. Like I said, the director apparently considers it 2 segments, but I do think they fit together as one that's just kind of broken up throughout the movie. It is interesting to me that the director could like barely speak any English, so it's very interesting that the segments are so dialogue heavy. Like that's pretty much all they are is just dialogue. And there is something here. It does feel like to start with the Ethan Hawke and Maggie Q segment. Um, I do. There's first of all, there's just always going to be something to me about watching Ethan Hawke with a lot of dialogue. There's obviously it's going to take you back to Linklater, of course, and the fact that this character does feel very much like Jesse in the Before trilogy, like between movies, like between the times he would meet up with Celine every 9 years. This is what Jesse was doing in between. This guy, I feel like, is a bit more aggressive in how he approaches women than Jesse is, but this guy's even a writer like Jesse is. And so he has this very sexually charged dialogue towards Maggie Q, trying to pick her up, and like I said, a fast-talking Ethan Hawke is going to be something I can watch at any time. It doesn't even matter what the dialogue is. That's going to be appealing to me. And Maggie Q obviously is very sort of... We can see immediately how he's drawn, why he's drawn to her, and she looks, gorgeous. But what's also interesting about this is Maggie Q is somebody I feel like we typically associate with more physicality, where she's much more into like action movies and action roles. So to see her come in here and handle the dialogue so naturally, I felt like was always kind of caught me off guard in a good way. To show that she could do more than just, big action scenes and stuff like that. And this, like I said, this one does feel like it's almost like it was written for Hawke in a way to try to be Linklater or try to be like something that feels like kind of a Before movie or something. And if you're looking for that, it definitely feels far from Linklater levels of natural. Like I said, there is an appeal here, but it does just... the only problem is it does just feel like the lesser version of something else, and that's kind of what's holding it back. Like, if Linklater movies didn't exist, or the Before trilogy didn't exist, I feel like this would probably be closer to the top, just based alone on just watching Ethan Hawke perform natural dialogue, especially when he has a female co-star that bounces off of him so well that he has instant sort of chemistry with. And then we have the Chris Cooper, Robin Wright one, where it's the same thing. Where I think the director said something about he was taken by when he came to America and the fact that you like smoking was basically banned indoors in most places. So the idea of having to come outside to smoke a cigarette was something that really stood out to him. So he wanted to use that kind of cinematically. Like I said, you see that there and you see that here, and as far as this conversation between Cooper and Wright, they do have this very they play it off very well at first, that they're supposed to come off like strangers to the audience at first. And then as it goes on and the familiarity starts to come in, the ultimate reveal does make more sense when you watch it back, and how they are kind of slowly getting closer as the segment goes on. And like I said, the natural back and forth that's going on here that played in the Ethan Hawke portion is very important here. And then this ultimate theme that it comes to where Ethan Hawke's character basically just wanted sex and Maggie Q ended up being a hooker, and Robin Wright just kind of wanted a connection with Chris Cooper, and it turns out that they are husband and wife, and the flame was kind of going out and they're kind of trying to rekindle it. So this idea that these two characters approach these people sort of desperately wanting something from them, and the big reveal is basically that that thing was always available. But the way we kind of see it without dialogue, just kind of watching them from a distance in the restaurant, how we kind of watch it come back, is a nice sort of satisfying conclusion, and kind of is this sort of opposite to what happens to Ethan Hawke, where they kind of go their separate ways, and he realizes that he could have had it, and then it just kind of stops him in his tracks, and that's where his journey sort of ends. Until I guess his part with the photographer, where he has his Love Actually moment, is like the only scene with the photographer that I kind of like. So my number 5 is going to be the one with Orlando Bloom and Christina Ricci. And this is another one that's interesting to look into the production of, because it kind of tells the story itself. Because this was another one where the director didn't really speak English at all, so the director essentially wrote this segment through storyboards. And it was the idea of whenever they'd have to rework the segment, they'd have to completely redo the storyboards. So the whole process of this is basically what ended up becoming the segment itself, where Orlando Bloom is sort of creatively stuck, and he's got a deadline, and he's got these certain confines, and he's really having trouble meeting them. And then he finds help through Christina Ricci over the phone. And what I also love about this especially is the fact that this is a segment about collaboration, essentially, between him and Christina Ricci to reach this common goal. And the director had a really nice story about how extremely collaborative Orlando Bloom was during this segment, where Orlando Bloom called him like 10 times and left like 10 voicemails every time he had an idea. And apparently that was like really helpful in kind of keeping everything on track with how they had to change a lot of stuff. And so, like I said, it's the way the process of this one translated to the project itself and what it ended up becoming, I feel like is kind of a really beautiful thing in a really sort of artistic way. And it's sort of, like in sort of an accidental way. While also being this sort of really sweet story about two people that have a connection nearly anonymously, where like they know who the other is, but he doesn't know what she looks like, and there are these moments where like she dropped off the books at his apartment, so she was there, and he had his chance to see her, and then she was just gone before he noticed. And it's like the way somebody can feel so close, but also so far away, I feel like is really beautifully told in this segment. And just kind of seeing their connection stripped down to just their voices. And I especially like playing this off with Christina Ricci being off screen for most of it, and just us being on Bloom by himself for a while. Really plays it up from his perspective of being able to feel a connection with somebody, maybe just through their voice. If this is like your only means of communication, and it's like I said, and it just feels plausible in a way. That feels like really romantic in this sort of untraditional way. And the way that when we see where he's like stuck with the brothers Karamazov and he can't get through it, and he even goes as far as to calculate like at the rate he's going how long it would take and how it's this completely impossible task. And so the way that she comes into it, it's like in more ways than one, she can make the impossible feel possible, which is essentially what happens, I feel like, when you kind of start to feel love for somebody, and it's like everything sort of changes and possibilities feel like they kind of change, and you feel a bit more capable and stronger. And I feel like that's the sort of relationship that's going on here, which, like I said, they don't even meet face to face until the very end of the segment. So I felt like that was just really beautifully told, and like I said, just has this authenticity to it that you may not expect. So number 4 is the one with Natalie Portman and Irfan Khan. Natalie Portman's starring in this one now with Mira Nair directing it. And this is a nice one because this is one that had to grow on me because it's one that almost seems like it's too simple at the start. But the more you kind of read into the characters and the more you really watch their interaction closely, where we see them, because number 1, you would think it doesn't really seem like there's much of a connection here at the start because it's just business. And then there's the whole, maybe the age difference. I'm not sure how old Irfan Khan was at this point, but it feels like there's a clear age difference. So that's another thing where it's just like, I don't see, the connection seems really random by the end of this. But once you actually watch the interactions and you see how it's clear that this has gone on many times before, like she's been here so many times and they've gone through these very similar interactions before, to the point that they can probably almost finish each other's sentences or thoughts at this point, just on a business standpoint alone, not even taking that in the romantic context. But as it's gone on, it's clear that there's been a connection here. But the thing is not only are both of them sort of trying to stay business-minded, but it's a connection that they couldn't acknowledge even if they wanted to, because they're just in two totally different places. They're in two different religions that have two different lists of restrictions that they go through, and actually ends up becoming a connection as they go through that. And also him being married and her about to be getting married. But the way, like I said, they bond over stuff like, the dietary restrictions and stuff like that, and like those things in general that are preventing this connection from being acknowledged, you get the sense that there's something here that's just kind of very quietly brewing, but it's almost like they both know that there's no way to act on this. And I feel like that's what's great, is not only one of the things that really keeps this one alive especially, and really helps this, is how natural the dialogue is between the two of them, to where it doesn't really matter where they come from or what their ages are. Just the way they talk to each other feels like almost like they knew each other in another life or something. And then, like I said, the fact that they're not acting on any impulses they might have. And I feel like that's something that people tend to get, they get prone to wanting or hoping for when they see, love stories happening, is they want people to act on their impulses. You want to see people get together that clearly have some sort of connection. So I love the idea of just watching two characters that just know right away. Like, there's no risk of these two acting on any sort of random impulse. Like, they absolutely know where they are in life and how they feel about each other, and that this, what we see in the segment, is the extent of it. And that's it. And it's like him sort of hugging her and kissing her head is as far as it's ever going to go. For all we know, they may never even see each other again unless they have another business interaction, which is honestly very likely. And they're probably going to pretend that this interaction never happened. Like, it'll be there unspoken, but it's... and the power of it will be there between them, but that's it. They both know their places, and that's what it's going to be. And to be able to take that from just this one thing, like I said, it seems very surface level, but like I said, the dialogue between them is so deep and natural. You can see a whole story that we don't see in it, which is just really beautifully done, especially in their performances. And then we have this ending that I like that feels a little ambiguous. May not be as ambiguous as I'm thinking it is, but to me it feels ambiguous, where we see her at her wedding, and then she visualizes that it's him across from her instead of her husband. And this is we see this first, and then we cut to him in his car, and then we cut back to this. And so what I've always taken it as is like, it's intentionally ambiguous as to who is having the fantasy of him and her having a wedding. Like, is she at the wedding visualizing him, and he's in his car, maybe, because he visualizes them in the, what's hanging off his rearview mirror. But it's like the idea, when we see those visions of him and her at the wedding, it's like, which one of them is having that fantasy? And I kind of like the ambiguity of that, where I feel like we don't know for sure, but it's also very likely that it's both of them. And it's like, in the idea of that, where like the both of them being in two separate places, knowing where their places are away from each other, having sort of the same fantasy about each other, is also this sort of unspoken connection that might go on forever for as long as they know each other. So I really, really love that one. So number 3 is the one with Bradley Cooper and Drea de Matteo. So this is another one that also kind of had to grow on me, but I think what I really love about this one is how it shows us visually our internalized monologues when we're not sure how we feel about somebody, and how frantic our thoughts can get, and how self-conscious our thoughts can get when we're trying to sort out if we like somebody in a certain way or not, and how that's a really specific thing. And the way that this one uses visuals and editing and internalized dialogue through, like, voiceover, to put that all together. And the idea of, like, this idea of a one-night stand that sort of lingers, where it's something that feels like it would be maybe a bit sleazy, or maybe a bad decision in another context. But this moment of there having been an actual connection that they both felt, and this idea that they're going to meet again, and the idea of... it's kind of this, will they, won't they thing, but it's also, because it's so internalized, should I or shouldn't I thing. Like, should I do this or should I not do this? And the way it's coming from both directions. And so when they do finally meet again and they start making out in the back of a cab, it feels like this really earned moment between two characters that we've gotten to know so well in the span of a few minutes, because not only are we hearing their thoughts specifically, but how sort of familiar these thoughts have probably been at some point through experiences, and taking those experiences that so many people probably know, and those feelings that so many people probably know, and being able to make them come to life cinematically, is something that'll always be appealing. When you can take things that are hard to put into words, but it's something that's familiar to so many people. The way they show the internal conflict, especially through that, is something that I really appreciate here. And like I said, the way it's building to this moment, and I don't even know that we realize it's building to this moment. But it's I love the fact that it's not just all that, like, it would have been sweet, if it ended at her walking up as he's getting into the cab, and it's like, oh, you showed up, and oh, you showed up, and it's like, oh, we feel the same way, that's nice. But I love the fact that we do get the scene where they make out in the cab, because it's like because everything was so, or the thoughts and the internalized dialogue was so frantic, because that's the way our mind works, especially here, where like our brain is constantly overworking. It makes perfect sense that it ends in like an emotional explosion rather than it doesn't end in relief, because it would have been ending in relief if it stopped when she walked up to the cab. But the fact that it ends in that explosion feels like it was building up to this that whole time. So that one's really, really well done. Also worth noting that one of the writers was Zan Cassavetes, and we talked about the Cassavetes connection that was in Paris also with the Jenna Rollins Ben Gazzara segment that I talked about. So all of that I can really appreciate. So number 2 is going to be the one with Eli Wallach and Cloris Leachman, the one that closes the movie. The one that very appropriately closes the movie. Because what's great about this, and what's great about the fact that this one closes the movie, is for most of this movie, it's about like young love and young couples and stuff like that, and like stuff like the previous one with Bradley Cooper and Trey DeMatteo, where it's like stuff where you're not sure how you feel and you're still trying to sort that out. There's a lot of that. And it's like the idea of what is the end game with, young love and relationships and stuff like that. And so it's like this segment shows that basically we look at Eli Wallach and Cloris Leachman and we have their interactions, and they're clearly driving each other crazy. They've obviously been in love for decades, and just through their conversations, through watching them drive each other crazy, where on the surface it just looks like two bickering old people, but it's like when you're looking at Eli Wallach, who's in his 90s at this point, and Cloris Leachman, who's in her 80s, it's clear we're telling a story of two people that have a whole story of love behind them and a whole life of love behind them, and like an endless, infinite number of little love stories in between all those years, probably. And to see how just simple and sweet the story is all it really needs. Like, all we need is just to watch these interactions and then come to that conclusion where they just sort of lovingly embrace each other. And the fact that when you look at all the stories that came before it of this young love, and it's like, what is the end game of love and relationships? It's basically to end up here, where we see them. Where it's like you may drive each other crazy, but you've got a life of love behind you and little moments in between, and it's still there. When you can barely move. Like when it's a trek to just like walk down the sidewalk. Where, yeah, it's like how long this can go on and how long these feelings can sustain. Where it just really feels like this ultimate culmination of all the stories we see in the movie. Is this, nice little story here. But, what I think the best segment in this movie is not only that, but it's kind of I love the last few we've talked about, but I feel like this one is my favorite by far. And it's the one with Julie Christie, Shia LaBeouf, and John Hurt, that Anthony Minghella wrote, I'm assuming very shortly before his death. And of course the movie's dedicated to him as well. So here's the thing about this one. This one, to me, is by far the most moving, it's the most heartbreaking, it's the most beautifully shot, the way they use the music. Everything about this segment is so beautiful and perfect. And I'm going to be completely honest with you about it. Remember, going back to the very beginning of this video, when my least favorite segment, I had said that I wasn't really quite even sure what was happening in it for a long time. I'm going to be honest with you here. I don't know that I could tell you exactly what's happening in this one either. And I've looked up theories on it, and there's a few theories, like, there's some, like, is Shia a ghost? Is he the younger version of John Hurt? Is John Hurt a ghost? Is there something else going on here entirely that's not supernatural or spiritual? Is it taking place in one time and then another time? It's kind of indecipherable, but I feel like the reason that works so well here is not just because it's so beautifully told and beautifully shot, and the performances are, every single note of every single performance is perfectly on key. These interactions between Julie Christie and Shia LaBeouf are just perfect in every way, and so like I said, so emotive without even really telling us directly what it's even emoting, but the feeling is there. And it might sound like bullshit, but it's very possible, I feel like, to not have a total grasp or a total understanding of something, yet still be able to feel that, like feel every aspect of this, like the very core of this story, just feel it in this really strong and powerful way. And like I said, there's hints of stuff in here that seem like they are adding up to something, like when she wants the violets, and it seems like that's going to be there's no violets anywhere, and then Shia is just able to go down and basically make them appear almost like magic. And when he says, "Are there any other miracles I can perform for you?" she says no, or she says, "I don't think so," or something, or "I doubt it." And as soon as she says no to him performing any more miracles, he has this nosebleed, and he comes off like he's dying or something. And then there's the second moment when he asks if she still sings, because they talk about this unseen manager. Because at first you might think John Hurt is the manager, but then he and Shia have that same dialogue about, the manager's been waiting for her, and the manager had the violets waiting, and the manager knew her way a long time ago, and that her singing is the memory that this manager's been carrying. And so when she basically says that she doesn't sing anymore is when Shia's character dies. Basically because he just can't go on. And he's already seemed weak through the whole segment. And so there's, in the way that Shia goes out the window, and then there's an implied thing here that John Hurt was called up to investigate what might have happened here. But the way it's edited is Shia goes out the window, and then John Hurt comes back through the window, and it's the curtains are very shroudy in this way, like they're passing on to another realm or something. So it's feels like there's an obvious connection between Shia and John Hurt's characters, and I am honestly not even sure what it is. Like I said, I can't completely take this apart and figure out what all the mechanics of it are saying. But there's just a feeling of it, and there's something else that I take away from this. And once again, might also feel like a cop-out, but I'm willing to go with it, which is talking about the fact that Anthony Minghella wrote this probably very shortly before his death, and the fact that I think what he actually died from was something. It was something related to surgeries because he had cancer already, and then there was a hemorrhage or something. So this is somebody that probably already felt like death was close when he was writing this. So wherever his mind was, it was basically on another realm by this point already. But if you're basically in the mindset that you're probably dying and you're very close to it, and then he wrote whatever this story is, it does feel like it just comes from another plane entirely, where it's something that we don't understand in this life, but might at some point, maybe even in another life. I don't know. Like I said, it might sound like bullshit, it might sound like a cop-out, but like I said, it's just so deeply moving to me, however you look at it, and however you want to interpret what it is. It's the ambiguity of it also, I think, that just keeps me coming back to it, where it's I don't even... I almost don't even want to try to figure it out. Just the fact that it's this ambiguous entity that seems to involve past and present, life and death in some way, and just makes you feel something. It's whether it be spiritual or existential or what it is, you definitely feel something, and you feel it really, really strongly, and that's why I really love this one so much, and why I think it's by far the best segment in this movie. So that's how I feel about New York, I Love You as a whole. Like I said, it probably would be much better to me if you take out the unnecessary photographer. Because that photographer also, not only is it unnecessary, but that's just gotta be one of the worst actresses I've ever seen. Some of the worst line deliveries ever. And I don't know why those scenes are there. I don't know why the Justin Bartha scenes are here either. Because the segments do work fine by themselves. And like Paris, I don't think there's really a bad one. Because like I said, I'm still in the process of giving the benefit of the doubt to the Hayden Christensen one. But other than that, the others do have strengths in them. So, just none of them are near as powerful as this one. So, this last one we talked about. So, I think that's going to do it for this. So the next thing is going to be the Versus, that's the follow-up to Ripley Underground that we talked about the other day. And then after that is another Versus, and then we've got a movie club and a Q&A. I think that's the order. And then we'll continue. We'll be about halfway through September, and we're going to keep going, not stopping anytime soon. So until the next thing, I think that's it.